Welcome to the Just in Time for Memorial Day weekend presentation of Book of Mormon Warnings of Secret Combinations, Illuminated Freemasonry, the CFR, and Donald Trump today. The LDS Church is always so patriotic at Memorial Day, but is it too friendly to the military-industrial complex? And why is that? This is part 2 of that presentation. In the first video, we saw some unnerving associations between leadership in various parts of society. Now we're going to see even more on the corporate governance network in the United States, how it really works, in addition to the introduction we saw to that amazing financial network through corporations disguised as publicly owned political bodies. We'll also be looking at the roles of churches run by occultists, high-level Freemasons, and their associations with and cooperation with others in a network described as secret combinations in the Book of Mormon, and their ultimate goals. You are on the Dodger Game channel watching a Mormon Truth video. Part 1 of this will be found on the channel. You can get into the channel just left of the subscription button. Don't forget to subscribe and like and get these videos as soon as they're out. Know everything you can about church history and the changing and evolving doctrines of Mormonism. I'll start with a few short clips from video 1.
Joseph Smith said that the Book of Mormon was the keystone of our religion and the most correct book on earth. This most correct book on earth states that the downfall of two great American civilizations came as a result of secret conspiracies whose desire was to overthrow the freedom of the people. And they have caused the destruction of this people of whom I am now speaking, says Moroni, and also the destruction of the people of Nephi. Now, undoubtedly, Moroni could have pointed out many factors that led to the destruction of the people. But notice how he singled out the secret combinations, just as the church today could point out many threats to peace, prosperity, and the spread of God's work, that has singled out the greatest threat as the great conspiracy. There is no conspiracy theory in the Book of Mormon. It is a conspiracy fact. And along this line, I would highly recommend to you a new book entitled None Dare Call It, Conspiracy by Gary Allen. Then Moroni speaks to us in this day and says, Wherefore the Lord commandeth you, when ye shall see these things come among you, that ye shall awake to a sense of your awful situation, because this secret combination which shall be among you.
What is inferred, it says, among you Gentiles. This is in Ether, chapter 8. So we're specifically told to be expecting a secret society or network of secret societies to be very powerful in taking control of society. And we are warned that we must not allow it to happen. We are given examples, and Nephi prophesies or tells what exactly has happened through Revelation with regards to certain events. When he is in, the Nephi in the garden scene, and he tells about how the chief judge was murdered by another member of their secret society. Now, in our day, we're conditioned to call people conspiracy nuts if they even suggest that there could be such a thing. We were told that these secret societies are basically urban legend and have a spin put on things so that we'll think that only some sort of a nutcase would believe in them. Conspiracy theorist is a loaded term now. Of course, the word theory implies that it's just a theory. And so now we're conditioned to believe that anyone who believes anything that would be contrary to what we're fed on the news, especially Fox News, is just a conspiracy nut. Some right-wing nut. But that's not what the Book of Mormon says. So what are we told at church? Where is Nephi now when it comes to September 11th and the events that occurred there? There are many intelligent people in the church. What is it that would cause intelligent people to not utilize their God-given ability to think rationally about certain things? What is it that causes people to mentally shut down in terms of their critical thinking skills when it comes to certain things? How are people trained or conditioned to do this? Again, we can look to Scientology, the Moonies, and the Jehovah's Witnesses to actually see good examples of how this is done. And then the obvious question becomes, are we doing this? Are we doing this with regards to what happened with September 11th? What things are we being encouraged to be loyal to and just take on faith and believe that don't make sense if we apply our rational thinking abilities? I recall how easy it was for me to see that the Jehovah's Witnesses' plan of salvation seemed so completely ridiculous, with their only 144,000 people that could be saved in their version of the celestial kingdom. Speaking with a JW missionary, I questioned her about this. She assured me that her mother was one of the saved, but that if she did well, she could be saved on earth. And so I said, so families can't be together forever? You do everything right, and you still can't be together with members of your family? How much sense does your plan of salvation make? I was able to use rational thinking. She became uncomfortable, because it was a little rough to defend her belief system, which made no sense. So I had to ask myself, have I done this with my own beliefs in some way? Or are members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints doing this in anything? I mean, our plan of salvation makes so much sense in many ways. Yet, are we believing some things without thinking about them with regards to our society? So, those are kind of things that I'm looking at here, and that I'm asking us to actually think about. So, for instance, faith. We have many definitions, or certain definitions of faith, but in other words, it's extolled as a virtue if we just decline to use rational thought about some things that don't seem to make sense. Accepting something on faith is extolled as a virtue. In other words, the more difficult something is to believe, the more unreasonable it is, the more faith it requires. So, the more irrational something is to believe, the greater our virtue is if we actually believe it. Now, think about that. How does that work for manipulating people? Let's say in one of those other churches that just aren't true and use these sorts of techniques of coercive persuasion. Let's just pretend it doesn't happen with us. But isn't the principle of faith used that way in other religions? And we have faith in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, but somehow everything's okay when it's the Lord's church, when we have the true gospel, the restored gospel. Of course, that's what the Jehovah's Witnesses say. For them that are in the truth, that's what they call it. For us, we have the restored gospel. For them, they're in the truth. What is it with Scientology? What is it with another religion? What do you call it in your religion if you're not LDS, when you're in the truth? Have we noticed how some of those high control organizations like the Moonies or Scientology or the J-Dubs take all their people's time? They use behavior control techniques, they use information control techniques, and they manage to manipulate belief systems so they don't question their divine leader who has sole access to God's pure revelation. Thank God we're not like them. Thank God we alone have the true gospel. And all those poor, deceived people that think they have the true gospel, well, they're just deceived, and perhaps we can help them. And when applying that to society and how our society is actually run through a secret government, essentially, through the financial means which we will or have seen evidence of done by the corporation nation film, and the highlights that we're using out of this to show exactly how this takes place in the financial world in the United States. When we've got this in front of our faces, we can't deny it. It's solid evidence. We can't call it theory any longer.
So let's take a look at some of these comprehensive annual financial reports. Let's go back to Delaware. Here on the Sunshine Review, we see the Delaware state budget for 2008 and 2009. Now remember, this is the taxpayer budget. It says, Delaware faced an $84 million budget gap for fiscal year 2009 as of February 2009. But not to worry, Governor Jack Markell will come to the rescue. Under his proposed actions, it says that the governor has proposed an expansion of gambling that would position the state as a Vegas-style destination, curing the economy with casinos. In the first year, the sports lottery is estimated to generate $55 million in additional revenue. Additionally, with corporate and income tax increases, program and benefit cuts, and an across-the-board payroll reduction of 8%, Markell told lawmakers his plan would balance next year's budget despite a $751 million revenue hole. Now, before we look at the comprehensive annual financial report, which is the full accounting of all the money that Delaware has, this is just one example of the simplistic graphs that are presented to the public. A citizen's guide to the budget. Here we have the fiscal year 2009 general fund operating budget, tax in, tax out. And in the putting it into perspective graph, the final challenge, we have a nice little snake with little dots showing us how that works. Now, after all of that, let's look at the 2009 Comprehensive Annual Financial Report for Delaware for the year ended June 30th, 2009. We won't go through the whole report in this case. However, one page, just one page in this report says it all. On page 29 of 192 pages is the section called Statewide Financial Analysis. It states that, as noted earlier, net assets may serve over time as a useful indicator of a government's financial position. This is referring to all of the investments and holdings that the Delaware state government has been holding for many, many years. It then says that the state's assets exceeded its liabilities by $5,204,000,000 at the close of the most recent fiscal year. I'll say that again. The state's assets exceeded its liabilities by $5,204,000,000 at the close of the most recent fiscal year. These are the investments that are not talked about on the budget report. Again, we are looking at the comprehensive, meaning full, everything, all assets and holdings. The state's assets exceeded its liabilities by $5,204,000,000. It then goes on to state that the largest portion of the state's net assets, 84.4%, reflects its investment in capital assets. For example, land, buildings, vehicles, and equipment, less any related outstanding debt used to acquire those assets. Now, to translate this, unrestricted net assets that may be used at the state's discretion for whatever the state wants to use it for is 8.1% of $5.2 billion. Now, since I'm sure you don't have a calculator handy, 8.1% of $5,204,700,000 is $421,580,000, which may be used at the state's discretion. Well, that certainly seems to be enough to pay the $84 million budget cap for fiscal year 2009 as reported on the Delaware state budget. So instead of using this excess $421 million, which is only 8% of total assets for fiscal year 2009 in Delaware, the governor's recommendation for the incoming governor is to trim education by another $36.4 million, plus a 3% cut to higher education, plus an 8% pay cut for state employees and the raising of taxes for residents who make more than $60,000 a year. This is the criminal extortion racket called government. This is just one example of hidden assets and expendable monies that are being used for shareholder profit instead of the fiscally responsible actions of supporting the populace of the state of Delaware. But you must remember that this is only the comprehensive annual financial report for the state government of Delaware. This does not include the hundreds or thousands of individual city, county, school district, pension fund, and other governments within the state of Delaware, which all have their own individual comprehensive annual financial reports showing other billions of dollars in investments and other assets. And you ain't seen nothing yet. Let's go on to some other CFRs from around the country. Moving further south, and still looking at the Sunshine Review, we see here the Florida state budget. It states that Florida state analysts estimate that the state faces a budget deficit for 2011 and 2012 of approximately $2.5 billion. And how do you protect communities and preserve peace of mind when you are robbing your constituents blind with your hidden wealth and investments? Now, in Florida's case, I decided to pull up not the actual comprehensive annual financial report, which would have just told you how much money it actually had, but in this case, Florida is one of the exceptional states that actually lists out its investment holdings in a long list. So, starting at page 1 of 1,479 pages of assets and investments held by the Florida state government, as listed in the Florida 2009 State Investment Holdings Report, the first page states, per the PFIA legislation, only publicly traded securities are included in this report. Privately held securities are not. So the following are just the investments that the state of Florida, the one individual government called the Florida State Government, with its own individual CFR, these are its investments in publicly traded companies. Now I'm just going to go through pages of investments and read you some of the companies that you might recognize. Starting on page 101, we see that as of June 30th, 2010, the corporate government of the state of Florida owns $558,771,266 worth of Johnson & Johnson stock. Here they have AT&T stock, $504.5 million. Here's Apple Computers, or Apple Incorporated, at $773.8 million in stock investments. Here's one that'll blow your mind. This is in the cash and temporary holdings category. Listed under Other, this is cash holdings, and it is listed at $6.7 billion. Also in cash and temporary, we have holdings in Japan. It doesn't really list what it is, it just says it's $39 million. Maybe it's yen. Back to stock investments, we have Abbott Laboratories, which is a pharmaceutical, at $210.8 million. For you World of Warcraft fans, Florida holds $17 million in stock investments in Activision and Blizzard, the company that makes your favorite game. Isn't it ironic that the very regulatory body that's supposed to rate video games for violence is the same government that has massive investments in the video game industry? Here's Adidas, the shoe and clothing company out of Germany, at $68.5 million. Advanced Auto Parts, an automotive retail chain, at $22.6 billion. How about Aetna? Managed healthcare at $49,685,000. African bank investments in South Africa, $16.3 million. Hey, why not? Gotta diversify, huh? Are you starting to understand that just a small amount of the money that governments have invested in corporations and foreign corporations could easily pay off the entire country's debt, let alone the state of Florida's? Sprint Nextel, wireless telecommunications services at $34.4 million. St. Jude Medical, a healthcare equipment provider, at $35.7 million. Staples Incorporated, specialty stores, at $65.6 million. Stanley Black & Decker household appliances at $24.8 million. State Street Corporation, listed as asset management and custody banks, at $55 million. Here's the State Bank of India, for a total of $18.5 million. This is the money that the government called the state of Florida, the corporation acting as the government of Florida, has been earning off the taxpayer money it collects from you, invests, and then never gives you, the taxpayer, any of the profits. There's Target, general merchandise store, listed at over $114 million. There's Texas Instruments, listed as semiconductors at $94.8 million. Verizon Communications, integrated telecommunications services, again at $261 million worth of stock investments. Now again, this is only the state government of Florida. This does not include each individual government within the state who has its own comprehensive annual financial report showing all of these types of investments. And may I just say, David Walker should be arrested right now for treason against the American people. Right now. Now remember, these are all publicly traded companies, and this list is not including private companies for which the Florida state government has invested in. Here's Viacom, movies and entertainment. Very important to control the entertainment and propaganda industry at $65.4 million. Now some of you might be thinking, why haven't I heard about this on the news? Surely if this was true, Glenn Beck would be talking about it. But for a $50 million contract, you'd probably sell your soul to the devil as well. Once again, when adding collective government investments into Fortune 500 companies, which includes the 5 or 6 major conglomerate media companies that own just about every major media outlet available to you, the control of information is vital in a crime such as this. Here's Visa Incorporated. We all unfortunately know what Visa is, and that appears to be a total of about $145 million. Here's Walmart Stores Incorporated. Oh, we all love the Walmart, at about $318 million. Wells Fargo, well look at there. Florida owns a major stake in my bank. $413.4 million. Here's Yahoo! Internet software and services at $50 million. 3M, industrial conglomerates, they make just about everything involving plastic at $192.3 million. Here's American Express, another banking and finance investment at $175 million. But just to make sure that you have the full perspective of what you've just looked at here, for each individual page for which you've just looked at, there are a total of 40 investments. I think that you get the idea that Florida has money, but it's not telling the people of Florida. Instead, it's cutting jobs, cutting public funding, and raising your taxes. On page 652, we see fixed income investments in the banking and finance industry. Here we see that the State Corporation of Florida has investments of a little less than $100 million in Goldman Sachs Group. They have about $26 million in Merrill Lynch, which I believe got sold off to Bank of America not too long ago. Again, a fire sale where assets are sold for pennies on the dollar, while liabilities are nationalized or divided amongst taxpayers. We have about $35 million in Morgan Stanley and about $35 million in Wells Fargo. On page 677, we see that Florida's combined holdings in just its SP funds are about $21 billion. Likewise, you can't just invest in one currency. Therefore, the State Corporation of Florida has invested in many, many different countries, including Australia, Brazil, Canada, the Czech Republic, Taiwan, Thailand, Turkey, the Queen in the United Kingdom, Germany, Malaysia, Belgium, France, Portugal,
Well, I kind of cut him off there. Cut out most of the middle of those countries as well, where they were doing the currency investment, foreign exchange trading, evidently. So the whole point of the Florida was just the fact that they went into some detail just to kind of give an idea of how vast these investments were. So, running over just a few things we learned on Florida, they had they had 40 investments per page. They had 1,479 pages, so that's about 59,000 investments listed in publicly traded corporations. They did not list their privately held corporations that they apparently invest in, or they wouldn't have bothered mentioning it in the first place. So we don't even know who those are. Probably some churches. Maybe your church. Maybe, yeah. Well, so the total of all these investments in the United States was about well over $100 trillion. So about 10 times, 12 times what the national debt was at the time. To the Federal Reserve international bankers who create money basically out of nothing and then charge interest on something they create out of nothing, when they actually, supposedly the Department of the Treasury could have done that from the beginning. So it's a debt that doesn't even need to be there. At any rate, $100 trillion. There doesn't need to be any national debt because all these investments, or they've been skimming and investing, is just massive. So they had $21 billion in just the S&P funds in Florida, in just the state government. And they probably had about 9,000 governments in Florida because it's about half the size of, California as far as population goes. They listed many countries with FX investments. The diversification's just, there's tons of it. 59,000 different listings of investments. So I don't even know what the total figures are. Now, if we think about the total figures for the entire United States, where it was, say, over 100 trillion, what do these numbers mean? Trying to comprehend it. Well, think about 1 inch to a mile, okay? There's 63,360 inches in 1 mile. If $1 represented 1 inch, or 1 inch represented $1, okay, then if you walked around the world 60,000 times around the entire planet, that would be close to about 100 trillion inches, or $100 trillion. It's incomprehensible, the amount of money there. And that's all being privately held, as he demonstrated. So, what did I cut him off from there? He went on later to talk about the pharmaceutical industry a little bit in Florida's investments, and mentioned Bayer AG, which broke off from IG Farben, the Nazi pharmaceutical company that basically ran the war machine efforts there. And the Prescott Bush's great-granddaddy Bush was involved with helping getting financing there through some U.S. bankers. German bankers. Anyway, the numbers are just beyond comprehension, so that's why I tried to do that example, and he tried to give an example. We've seen more than is fathomable in one listening, probably to begin to comprehend. We just don't have the type of government that we thought we did. Everything is a company. We are human cattle. When people cross borders, they're just paying, it's like a toll charge because they are human cattle. When people do everything, when people are born, there's a birthing certificate, birth. The words mean something different than you think they do. They relate to maritime. At any rate, I think I'm going to try and make this a little shortened at this point. It's been kind of long, and we've learned a lot. We've learned when people are working together at high levels. We've seen signs and symbols. We've seen how they exchange greetings, which indicate their brotherhood. We listened to President Hinckley. If we think carefully about the things that he said, he compared the Americans to the Nephites, as if the Americans were being attacked. But no, the Americans were attacking country after country after country, especially in the Middle East, with the excuse being this war on terror. So while the United States Armed Forces were incinerating people alive, bombing them in Iraq, he was comparing those people being destroyed to the Gadianton robbers. Now, he knows very well that those people had nothing to do with the Twin Towers plus Building 7, the Lehman Brothers building, coming down via demolition, or with the planes that hit the first two to create an image of terror and kill some other people before the building went down. The whole thing is horrendous. And when we think about the knowledge and foreknowledge that these people have of what actually had to take place for these things to occur, we know that President Hinckley is not a stupid man. So we have to think through this. He knows that the Americans were not like Nephites as they went and murdered tens of thousands of people at a time. That first month, how many people were killed? Throughout the wars in the Middle East, there's 500,000 people dead in Syria from the civil wars there. And the United States has been involved in destabilizing governments all over the world, but especially in the Middle East and Latin America for many, many years. The death toll is beyond comprehension. And this man, we have to ask ourselves, do we think he really doesn't know what's going on? He's looking into the eyes of a player on the political side that he cooperates with, that he helped garner support of the LDS people for a war of mass murder, unprovoked mass murder. The people of Iraq had nothing to do with what occurred in New York. Neither did the people in Afghanistan. There may have been a few people somewhere in the Middle East that had something to do with it. Obviously, demolition charges were involved to bring down the buildings. It really takes a person with some kind of mental block to watch those buildings come down, especially one that was never hit, and somehow imagine that an airplane melted all the steel supports throughout the entire building simultaneously on every floor. That's beyond belief, to think that anyone would actually believe the administration's story. An additional note on that whole scene was, of course, that Professor Stephen Jones at BYU was discussing those exact points of how it had to be explosives like thermite used to bring down the buildings, like they'd bring down every other building in that same way. And we know that, Tucker Carlson just made a fool out of him on Fox News intentionally and wouldn't allow him to show his movie or pretended he didn't have it or didn't have time or whatever it was. And BYU got rid of Professor Jones, and BYU invited Dick Cheney out, and I presume President Bush, and we saw that Gordon B. Hinckley presented Dick Cheney with an honorary doctorate degree from BYU. That wasn't a public relations maneuver and shutting down the demonstrations against the war as well at BYU. President Hinckley offered his support, and he said his personal loyalties went, is the way he described them, and pretended that the Americans were like the Nephites as they started war after war after war of destruction. Saw the things that the news media, all the media use, begin to see what they use to manipulate our thought patterns on how we perceive our society. I noticed certain techniques being used in the church. Perhaps if you learn about such things, hypnotic language and other effects, semi-hypnotic states being induced during hymn singing, and then suggestions being made to the suggestible mind, such as the repetitions, follow the prophet, follow the prophet, follow the prophet, he knows the way. Gordon Hinckley emphasized certain points during his talk, besides inducing feelings of loyalty towards liberty and defending family, as if the United States people were actually doing that as they massacred families in Iraq and Afghanistan and throughout the Middle East. He said that young man was proud to be representing our way of life. Listen to the words he used. And of course, he felt safe knowing our Heavenly Father was with him. Heavenly Father approves of going and murdering people all across the world to promote the American Empire, the British Empire, the Roman Empire. Who licenses all of this from the Vatican? Well, is that really something you think Heavenly Father approves? Is that the same Heavenly Father that approved of the Crusades and the Inquisition and the exterminating of most of the Native Americans, the children of Lehi, who apparently have a DNA issue? Listen carefully to the words that President Hinckley spoke. Think about what he actually was saying. The example of the Amalekites on the towers is so representative of the news media and those very influential people called the religious leaders and the preachers, etc., who influence their flocks to accept the will of the corporations that profit from war. As a postscript note here, I was just thinking, if you're out golfing, especially if you're ever out golfing at Torrey Pines Golf Course in San Diego, North County, where the Buick Invitational is held, we did find on page 666 of that Florida State Corporation, quasi-camouflaged, impersonating as government report, CFR, or detailed pages report, that the state of Florida owns $12 million at that time value worth of stock in the Torrey Pines Golf Course, which happened to be an enterprise operation by the government of the city of San Diego, which is another one of the 185,000 for-profit corporations doing business. I wonder if the folks in the government from Florida get to go golfing for free at Torrey Pines for investing $12 million in that privately owned but masquerading as publicly owned golf course. And next time you go to church, wonder if the state of Florida or the city of Salt Lake or the city of Sacramento or the city of Tallahassee owns shares in the corporations of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, in the corporation of the First Presidency, or in the many, many, many companies that are owned in the name of the church or through stock investments by the church. It is an entire empire of its own, just like some of these others, some of the biggest ones. Double PS. When you think about the board of directors of the corporations and knowing that the church is a huge corporate empire, you ever ask yourself who those board of directors are? I imagine that we'll find them in the quorums of the 12, First Presidency, and possibly some of the others. Have you ever wondered why you don't see a poor cobbler in the First Presidency or the quorum of the 12 these days? How they all seem to be high-level leaders, business executives? Yeah, sure. You got to be successful in business to be successful in the church, though. The Lord has blessed them in everything, right? It's that gospel of prosperity thing. Doesn't the Lord have room for someone with spiritual devotion that hasn't made it as a corporate lawyer, surgeon, or administrator in the educational system for the church? Now let's head to what the Corporation Nation video calls the ultimate in corruption. That would be showing the financial report of Salt Lake City, Utah, along with Sacramento. where he shows certain details that you will probably as well find rather interesting, and he wraps up his point on corporate governance, showing how the corporations actually have power to govern everything through their investment holdings and voting power through the shareholding in the corporations. Hey, well, we're talking about corporations and churches being 501c3 corporations, and that general conferences are just a required budget meeting for the corporation. Did you notice on Saturday, general conference, Saturday morning, when they did the financial report, they didn't mention one number. They said, well, it's been audited, and we found that the church functioned within a budget like every good LDS family should do. That's our report. Amen. In the name of Jesus Christ. I mean, give me a break. That was a financial report?
And now we get to perhaps the most important part of this whole presentation. For if you comprehend the following, you will finally understand what corporate governments and government-owned corporations really are. Here on Chart E, CalSTRS lists its largest equity holdings as of June 30th, 2000. And it states that just in General Electric stock alone, it holds 28,948,341 shares of General Electric stock, with a market value of $1,534,262,073. That, my friends, is a major market share of General Electric stock. And once again, we must remember that this is just one of over 185,000 different governments in the United States. It also lists Intel Corp with 9.9 million shares, Cisco Systems at 20.5 million shares, Microsoft Corporation at 15.7 million shares, Pfizer Pharmaceuticals Incorporated at 18.6 million shares, ExxonMobil Corporation at 10 million shares, Walmart Stores at 12.8 million shares, Oracle Corporation at 8.6 million shares, Nortel Networks Corporation at 9.2 million shares, and Vodafone AirTouch at 147.8 million shares. And these are just the largest of the stock holdings within CalSTRS. Walter Burian of CalPERS.com has estimated that government ownership of just Microsoft Corporation stock is at approximately 83%, with the 5 boroughs of New York City proper owning collectively about 5% of that company. This means that everything that you do on your computer and everything that is included in your end-user agreement belongs to the government. And the government is the one regulating the internet. It's also the one regulating advertising, usury, and fraud laws. The conflicts of interest here are astounding. Because remember, the Central Intelligence Agency and the National Security Agency are private government offices with access to everything that you do on the internet and through Microsoft. And Apple computers are also government-owned. Now, understanding that, we go to page 46, where CalSTRS actually devoted a paragraph to corporate governance. Now, if you still don't comprehend what a proxy vote means, this is an admission of guilt. It states, during the 1999-2000 fiscal year, CalSTRS voted on a variety of proxy issues including financial, corporate governance, and social issues. There were 7,192 votes cast on proxy issues of corporations whose shares were owned in the investment portfolio. These proxy issues were presented on 2,789 companies. The overall number of proxy issues increased from 6,588 last year, but the number of mergers and acquisitions reviewed remained constant at a little more than 10%. Merger activity, both within United States borders and across the borders, continued its steady course, especially in those transactions where stock is the compensation received by the acquired company's holders. This reflects the continued appreciation in the stock market both at home and abroad. So this government corporation, one of over 185,000 within the United States, just told us that it voted on a variety of proxy issues including financial, corporate governance, and social issues, with 7,192 votes cast on proxy issues of corporations whose shares were owned in their investment portfolio. In other words, CalSTRS is acting as a major shareholder, voting as partial owners of these corporations on issues that dictate the future success of those corporations. This is corporate governance, in the words of the United States government. This is perhaps the most important, revealing paragraph you will ever read in your lifetime. This is fascism. Then on page 47, CalSTRS states that by proxy, the major issues voted on are summarized below. And once again, this is criminal activity. And by this point, surely you realize the Constitution is out the window. Number 1, election of directors. CalSTRS generally votes in favor of directors unless the proxy statement shows circumstances contrary to policy. The selection of auditors and accountants. CalSTRS generally votes in favor on the independent auditors and accountants recommended can only serve to benefit CalSTRS. The government is the corporations. The corporations are the government. There is no fine line. That line has been erased. And just like our Constitution, money is out there in this collective government. Let's just take a look at a few more governments and municipalities from around the country. Let's start with my hometown and the capital of California, Sacramento. $1.3 billion. We have total net assets at $2,518 million for the city of Sacramento. And that's important because this is only the city government or municipality of Sacramento and its summary of net assets. But what about the county of Sacramento? Again, the county of Sacramento is a totally different government. And within its comprehensive annual financial report for the year 2009, again under the financial highlights section, and under its statement of net assets for the year ended June 30th, 2009, expressed in thousands of dollars, we see the total for liabilities and net assets equals in the positive, meaning its assets outweigh its liabilities, by $6,712,350,000. So Sacramento County ain't doing so bad. Sacramento County is, of course, invested in the California Public Employees Retirement System, or CalPERS. And the more government employees, the better for the fund, since each employee enrolled in this pension fund for state workers requires by law that their state employers contribute to the fund as well. Of course, that is taxpayer money that is being contributed on behalf of these state employees, since taxpayer money funds these government offices. Thus, the intent and motive for the creation of government jobs and the hiring and firing of state employees is based more on profit for the state and local pension funds, way more than it is for just government-related business need. So, let's take a look at the CalPERS CAFR. As we examine this financial report, we again get a look into the vast amounts of wealth that California holds in its pension funds. Dwarfing the California State Teachers Retirement Pension Fund, the CalPERS Summary of Investments for its Public Employee Retirement Fund shows a total investment value of $197,102,773,341. It also shows real estate investments at almost $20 billion. However, in this almost $200 billion fund, it's fairly obvious that CalPERS is invested in Fortune 500 and foreign corporations. And here again we have the largest stock holdings for CalPERS, and it appears to be the usual suspects with stock investments in ExxonMobil Corporation at 14.2 million shares, Microsoft Corporation at 23.1 million shares, Johnson & Johnson at 7.6 million shares, AT&T at 17 million shares, Procter & Gamble Company at 8 million shares, International Business Machines at 3.9 million shares, Chevron Corporation at 6.1 million shares, JP Morgan Chase Company at 11.1 million shares, Apple Computers, once again at 2.5 million shares, and Walmart rounds out the top 10 at 7.2 million shares. It also lists its largest bond holdings, listed in thousands and showing billions and billions of dollars worth of bond holdings. And it seems like everybody's invested in the Tennessee Valley Authority. And interestingly, and what seems to me a bit of a conflict of interest, is that it's having J.P. Morgan Securities as one of its larger brokers. I find it hard to believe that there's not some conflict of interest in having major stock holdings in the company that is your broker. And we see that the total commission and broker fees for the pension fund is $84,418,000. And at the end of it all, we see that net assets held in trust for pension and other post-employment benefits equals $178,899,883,000, plus a little over $1 billion in other California funds. And now you understand where a lot of this government money is being hidden, within the pension and other funds. Now, this documentary wouldn't be complete if I didn't include the Salt Lake City Corporation, would it? According to Salt Lake City Corporation's Comprehensive Annual Financial Report, year ending June 30th, 2009, under its Financial Highlights section, it states that the assets of Salt Lake City, the city, exceeded its liabilities at the end of the current fiscal year by $2,116,861,947. Net assets for year 2009 increased by $65.9 million. It also states that the city's governmental funds reported combining ending fund balance of $119.2 million, an increase of $28.7 million compared to the prior year's ending amount. Fines and forfeitures, assessments, interest, intergovernmental, parking meters, charges for services, contributions, sales use and excise taxes, franchise taxes. These serve to benefit no one, and the total revenues collected from the people of the municipality or corporation of Salt Lake City equate to $191 million just in fines and fees. Again, we see corruption at its finest. And we see that the fund balance, which represents all of these fees and other usurious activities, is in the black at $24,258,000. Now again, we just made the mistake of taking this statement of net assets as the total government assets, without taking into consideration the enterprise operations, operating investment funds, and pension funds listed towards the end of the report. Now in the Salt Lake CFR, it states that the city participates in 3 cost-sharing multiple employer public retirement systems, PERS, PERS, and 1 multiple employer agent PERS. And it references the public safety retirement system, and it goes into the actuarial rate and asset values. So let's take a look at Utah Retirement Systems, a component unit of the state of Utah. It states that the fair value of assets as of January 1, 2009 was $15,886,000 and grew by almost $2 billion to a fair market value of $17,717,000 as of December 31st, 2009. Also, it states the actuarial value of these assets, which are available for benefits, is at $20,818,000. Once again, we get into our corporate governance section, and the state pension fund has its list of largest assets held. ExxonMobil, Apple, J.P. Morgan Chase, Microsoft, Google, Hewlett-Packard, Cisco Systems, Pfizer, Wells Fargo, and AT&T. Once again, this represents ownership in all of these companies, and these are just the top 10. And once again, we see the conflict of interest by having J.P. Morgan Chase as a broker, and we see that the total of fees and commissions paid for this particular fund was $4,367,000. Now, in its other fund, again, we have a different list of largest assets held, and we see that it includes the same stocks, with Apple Computers, Google, Microsoft Corporation, Hewlett-Packard, Cisco Systems, Qualcomm, J.P. Morgan Chase, ExxonMobil, Visa, and Schlumberger Limited, and lots of money invested in debt securities. And so once again, we can see where the state of Utah, the city of Salt Lake, and the county of Salt Lake are stashing and investing their money. Now, there is one final curtain that needs to be unveiled here. The Federal Reserve has been a hot topic of conversation among those in the truth and freedom movements. And leading the pack with his winning smile and stoic persona is the lovable congressman by the name of Ron Paul. Mr. Paul is the leading advocate of not only ending the central bank in the form of the Federal Reserve, but also of auditing this horrendous bank as well. But audit is an interesting choice of words to use for his cause, since Ron Paul is fully aware that the Federal Reserve is obligated under federal law to submit a comprehensive annual financial report to the federal government. While I respect and admire Congressman Paul, sadly, as a congressman, he is equally complicit in the cover-up of these financial audits in the form of CFRs. The Comprehensive Annual Financial Report is the audit of the Federal Reserve. And he knows this. What did the Founding Fathers think of democracy? The word democracy does not ever appear in the Declaration of Independence nor in the Constitution. It also never appears in any of the 50 state constitutions. In short, we are not supposed to be a democracy. The Founding Fathers actually did everything they could to keep our new country out of a democracy, knowing that a democracy is just a patriotic word for an oligarchy. Here's what some of the Founding Fathers had to say about a democracy. Quote, "Democracies have ever been spectacles of turbulence and contention, have ever been found incompatible with personal security or the rights of property, and have in general been as short in their lives as they have been violent in their deaths." Unquote. James Madison, the father of the Constitution, from the Federalist Papers, quote, "Democracy never lasts long. It soon wastes, exhausts, and murders itself." Unquote. Samuel Adams. Rome was a democracy as it fell in 180 AD, as all historically significant democratic empires have. Now, politicians and corporations will denounce this, ridiculously proclaiming that we have a democratic republic. But in truth, the two concepts are too opposite from each other to be used to describe each other. This would be like describing a color as blackish white. The Bill of Rights are God-given. They are not privileges to be suffocated and chiseled away by legalities and statutes, forced upon the public by corporate government weasels in fancy suits, ties, and black robes. Government-owned corporations were never intended to be the police, the treasury, the municipalities or cities, the army, or the appointed legislators. But this is what we have become, a democracy. A better title would be an oligarchic corpocracy, or fascism. Corporations owned through a collective investment by the government, whom advertise popular candidates like Obama, knowing that once he is elected, he will appoint former, current, and future corporation lobbyists and attorneys, CEOs, and board members into positions favorable to private corporate government no-bid contracts, thus ensuring future revenue generation for the government-owned corporations while generating wealth and kickbacks for the corporate representatives that are appointed by the elected official, namely the President of the United States Corporation, U.S. Inc. Remember, by electing one person as president, you are giving permission to that person to appoint hundreds and hundreds of unelected officials, who then also appoint unelected officials under themselves, and thousands of appointed corporate power brokers with fancy titles like Chief of Staff and Secretary of Defense. The point here is this: you do not have a representative government. End of story. Thus, when we hear our politicians and media hounds constantly harping about bringing democracy to the rest of the world, what this really means is that the United States Incorporated wants to expand its business base internationally, be it oil in Iraq, poppy seeds in Afghanistan, water and mineral rights in South America, or simply the power to use our corporate and United Nations-controlled military to destroy a country's infrastructure so that companies like Halliburton can receive billions in taxpayer money
to rebuild the newly controlled asset. Let's see what Gordon B. Hinckley, the prophet of the Lord, has to say about war situations in his time. See.
Those of us who are American citizens stand solidly with the President of our nation. The terrible forces of evil must be confronted and held accountable for their actions. Of such groups, the Book of Mormon speaks of the Gadianton robbers, a vicious, oath-bound, and secret organization bent on evil and destruction. No one knows how long it will last. No one knows precisely where it will be fought. No one knows what it may entail before it is over. We've launched an undertaking of size and nature of which we cannot see at this time. Occasions of this kind
now more than ever, As the families in the Middle East and elsewhere brace against the bombs of the American war machine, God needs to be communicating with his prophets to cry out against these modern Gadiantons and proclaim peace to the world, freedom from this wickedness. But instead, ministers of all faiths promote war. They stand as Amalekites upon the towers. In the name of patriotism, liberty, and freedom, they support war efforts and call the people to obey their wicked leaders, as the Amalekites did to the Lamanites who attacked the innocent Nephites in the Book of Mormon. And even now, as the bombs are falling in the Middle East, we ask, where's the prophet of the Lord? Gordon B. Hinckley, art thou a prophet?
I do not know what the future holds. In the course of history, tyrants have arisen from time to time who have oppressed their own people and threatened the world. Such is judged to be the case presently, and consequently, great and terrifying forces with sophisticated and fearsome armaments have been engaged in battle. Many of our own church members have been involved in this conflict. In a touching letter I received just this week, a mother wrote of her Marine son who's serving for the second time in a Middle Eastern war. She says that at the time of his first deployment, he came home on leave and asked me to go for a walk. He said, "Mom, I have to go so you and the family can be free to worship as you please. And if it costs me my life, then giving my life is worth it." He is now there again and has written to his family recently saying, "I am proud to be here serving my nation and our way of life. I feel a lot safer knowing our Heavenly Father is with me."
This is a war of aggression and violates the commandments in the Scriptures.
As citizens, we are all under the direction of our respective national leaders. They have access to greater political and military intelligence than do the people generally. Those in the armed services are under obligation to their respective governments to execute the will of the sovereign. When they joined the military service, they entered into a contract by which they are presently bound and to which they have dutifully responded. In a democracy, we can renounce war and proclaim peace. However, we all must also be mindful of another overriding responsibility, which, I may add, governs my personal feelings and dictates my personal loyalties in the present situation. When war raged between the Nephites and the Lamanites, the record states that the Nephites were inspired by a better cause, for they were not fighting for power, but they were fighting for their homes and their liberties, their wives and their children, and their all, yea, for their rights of worship and their church. And they were doing that which they felt was duty, which they owed to their God. The Lord counseled them, "Defend your families, even unto bloodshed." And Moroni rent his coat, and he took a piece thereof, and wrote upon it, "In memory of our God, our religion and freedom, and our peace, our wives and our children." And he called it the title of liberty. It is clear from these and other writings that there are times and circumstances when nations are justified, in fact, have an obligation to fight for family, for liberty, and against tyranny, threat, and oppression. Peace. We are followers of our Redeemer, the Lord Jesus Christ, who is the Prince of Peace. But even he said, "Think not that I am come to send peace on earth. I came not to send peace, but a sword." I believe that God will not hold men and women in uniform responsible as agents of their government in carrying forward that which they are legally obligated to do. It may even be that he will hold us responsible if we try to impede or hedge up the way of those who are involved in a contest with forces of evil and repression. Secret combinations, lusting for power, nation that seeks to overthrow the freedom of all lands, nations, and countries is increasing its evil influence and control over America and the entire world in the rule of law. Scowcroft has been a key and trusted advisor for the last 5. And as National Security Advisor to President Bush, is a steady and vital associate in ongoing relationships between the White House and leaders of all other nations across the world. President Hinckley, President Lee, we have perhaps an unparalleled opportunity to help create a new world order, one more conducive to the values Americans have held dear. A new world order will appear. The issue is not whether there will be a new world order, and suggest what the new world order can and should become.
That BYU graduation address, we had featured speaker Brent Scowcroft, Elder Scowcroft, General Scowcroft, and one of the architects of the NSA and most connected men on earth as far as involvement with organizations promoting the New World Order. Let's take just a quick look at Brother Scowcroft here. This is in the Superclass Index for NGO involvement. At the top of the list in the world, we've got Henry Kissinger. Down the list, we see George Shultz, David Rockefeller, Zbigniew Brzezinski, the Bush family, Paul Volcker, former head of the Fed, and Brent Scowcroft coming in at, I think that's number 10 there, just ahead of George Soros. Okay, and his involvement, and you see some of these other guys on here. Going to the next list here, this is in America. Henry Kissinger topping the list once again. There we see the Rothschild and Bush families, Maurice Greenberg, Paul Volcker, and Brent Scowcroft, again, right next to George Soros. Rumsfeld, Peter G. Peterson, if you know who he is. Okay, Dick Cheney. Alright, these groups. Scowcroft's president of Scowcroft's Group, International Business Consulting Firm. He's in Aspen Strategy Group, Trilateral Commission. This is on Wikipedia, by the way. Council on Foreign Relations, Center for Strategic International Studies, the Atlantic Council. These are all NWO things. The Bohemian Grove. He's part of the Bohemian Club, the most perverted club on earth, probably. People like Kissinger in there. There it is. Scowcroft next to Kissinger. All these horrendous people. David Rockefeller. It's a huge list, but you know, these are guys that are actually members of that particular super perverted club. So, CFR, Trilaterals, Bohemian Club, NSA, Chief, you know, everything. And he's speaking to the BYU students. Nice. With no resistance.
Stories about fraud. The Bohemian Club. As you say, Bohemian Club? That's where all those rich Republicans go up and stand naked against redwood trees, right? I've never been to the Bohemian Club, but you ought to go. It'd be good for you. Get some fresh air.
So in that Bill Clinton clip there, when he mentions the Bohemian Club, or when the fellow brought it up, it took about 10 seconds for security to grab him and throw him out. They apparently don't want people talking about what the politicians and world leaders do with the fires of Moloch at the Bohemian Grove.
Out of these troubled times, our fifth objective, a new world order can emerge, a new era, freer from the threat of terror, stronger in the pursuit of justice, and more secure in the quest for peace. 100 generations have searched for this elusive path to peace, while 1,000 wars raged across the span of human endeavor. Now we can see a new world coming into view. A world in which there is the very real prospect of a new world order. A world where the United Nations is poised to fulfill the historic vision of its founders. Global governance.
Never before has a new world order had to be assembled from so many different perceptions.
A truly global society.
Good evening, everybody. President Obama and British Prime Minister Gordon today calling for a new world order to tackle our global economic crisis.
And the President outlined his vision of a new world order in which the U.S. would participate fully.
We've got to give them a stake in creating the kind of world order that I think all of us would like to see.
So open for too long. When our founders declared a new order of the ages, when soldiers died in wave upon wave for a union based on liberty, they were acting on an ancient hope that is meant to be fulfilled. And after 1989, President Bush said, and it's a phrase that I often use myself, that we needed a new world order, and instead it looks like we got a lot of...
Well, we heard what Bill Clinton had to say about the Bohemian Club with the Scowcroft, Kissinger, and the boys go to. Now, they mentioned Hillary being a witch, but Bill Clinton used the witchcraft language in his famous speech where he called for the forcing of the spring. If you do a little research on that, you will discover heavy-duty witchcraft in his speech. Nice picture with Hillary and Trump, huh? You think he'd really put her in jail? Were they really rivals? Were they? Or is it a show? Now let's examine another thought. In the Book of Mormon, we read much about the Gadianton Band, a secret society, an oath-bound secret society that manipulates the people, and manipulates the society through advancing its numbers, advancing its members in positions of authority in society, in the government, the judgeship, and it would follow, just as it is done today, in education, in the media, and so on and so forth. So they mentioned privately held corporations, and it sounded like Florida was invested in privately held corporations, which they did not show on their balance sheet. What privately held corporations might those be? Churches? We learned that churches are corporations, 501c3 corporations. Who holds the stock in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints? You know, when you think about the power that the stockholders hold, the majority stockholders of the board of directors, and the policy that companies need to follow to please the stockholders, we see certain, what we would call politically correct venues or themes in many commercials from various companies on television, touting certain themes that are in the politically correct agenda. We've also seen the LDS Church do that. The Church has changed a lot, and what it's talking about now is doctrine, disavowing things that were scriptural from Joseph Smith and reiterated or expounded upon by Brigham Young and some of his associates, such as Orson Pratt, Heber Kimball, and Jedediah Grant. So, what's this due to? Is God just changing all of a sudden? I thought God was unchangeable. But many things have changed. Whether you think it's a good thing or it's a bad thing, the fact is it shows God is changing. And with all this corporate governance business, you have to ask yourself, who does own the major stock in the preferred shares of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the Corporation of the First Presidency, and various other portions of the vast corporate empire? That's owned. That's owned. Now, the church supposedly has gotten into some financial trouble. Not lately, but what about when they gambled everything, mortgaged everything, in order to invest in, was it the sugar beet industry and so forth, and then the market kind of crashed? Did they get in trouble there? And did they wind up in trouble with, was it Union Bank of New York, or Rockefeller Bank? And were they bailed out maybe by someone in the Rothschild clan? I've read that. Now, how can I verify it? I don't know, but what I can see is that the church has gotten awfully politically correct over the not too many years lately. People talk about it was political pressure for the race and priesthood thing, but it just happened about 2 months right before the Sao Paulo, Brazil temple opened. And I'm sure that temple is a lot more profitable with people of mixed blood being able to officiate and be patrons. There are those that said it would not have been able to operate at all. You had to show photographs 4 generations back to make sure you weren't a white Negro when joining the church in Brazil, if you read up on that. So you're making sure that
That one drop of blood that was tainted with the blood of Cain wasn't being given the priesthood back before June of 1978. Plenty of speculation on why those things happen, but somebody owns the stock. Some holding company owns the stock. And he mentioned the merger and acquisition policies and so forth. If you take a look at the steady course of mergers, you notice so many companies are owned now by huge conglomerates. And many you just don't even notice the holding companies behind them. Whether it's the food market, supermarkets, whether it's in banking, whether it's in energy companies, or telecommunications. Things have gone from many companies and smaller companies to huge conglomerates. He said the media was owned by about 6 companies in the United States. I mean, look at these. If you do a little investigating, you'll find out that the wealth and power is held by a very, very few. So, this was a lot about the physical aspects, the financial aspects, practical and provable aspects of something that's not in harmony with what they were teaching in church. Not last I checked.
Understanding the purpose of the temple in LDS religion requires letting go of certain preconceived ideas about religion. There's reason to believe that religions, or the portion of them that are doled out for membership to the people at large in society, are all fraudulent. Those who are at the top tend to be occultists, who have their own religion, which is not the religion they profess outwardly. These religions serve multiple purposes. They're profitable businesses, and they're elements of control for those who are in control of society. And so they must teach those things which those in control of government covertly wish to be taught. You'll note that whenever the United States Incorporated wants to go to war, they get the Christian ministers to inspire patriotism in the people and support the war effort. Just as Joseph Smith saw it in the Book of Mormon with the Amalekites on the towers convincing the Lamanites to go to war against the Nephites. The temple binds Mormons to the religion, to loyalty, in following the brethren, and paying tithing. The business must have income to flourish. Using the motivation of the people, which is to live with their families in happiness forever, which necessitates participating in temple ordinances, both for the living and for the deceased, in order to give all of your family tree members the opportunity to accept Jesus Christ as their Savior in this life or in the alleged life hereafter. Where we are told deceased priesthood holders continue to labor in preaching the gospel of salvation and eternal family relationships through the same actions of repentance and accepting the Father's plan of eternal progression, by following the commandments attributed to Jesus Christ, in order to qualify through doing all we can to serve and obey Him, that He may grant us forgiveness, and whatsoever we lack, to become saved by His grace, and become heirs of eternal life, joint heirs with the Christ. So, you do all you can to help bring salvation to all your family, past, present, and future, as well as the rest of mankind. You obey Jesus by obedience to the brethren, who claim to be His authorized representatives through the holy priesthood. This system gives total divine authority to command absolute obedience by the superiors in the priesthood, bound by oaths taken in the temple, and tied to the eligibility for the promised blessings previously mentioned, which are automatically nullified if you fail to endure to the end. In other words, the day you stop paying and otherwise obeying anything you are counseled or called upon to do, whether it's serving as a full-time missionary or clean up the church properties, or teach Sunday school, or serve as a membership or financial clerk, or any other free labor to build or maintain the massive corporate empire which you are indoctrinated to believe is the current structure of the kingdom of God on earth. You are responsible for helping provide saving ordinances for your ancestors, which deceased ancestors provide an endless excuse for a need to return to the temple and remain fully worthy through obedience, including tithing. Temple participation reinforces indoctrination in mind programming, including technologically enhanced methods, creating members who believe they firmly chose obedience all on their own, when in fact they've been mind-controlled to obey, serve, and be fleeced by the sheep shearers that head the flock home, the leaders of the religion. The leaders of business and government and banking and media and education are all connected to the networks of secret societies, or through such networks, shall I say. Tithing is like interest. Like all payments to churches, banks, and governments, they are tribute paid by the conquered enslaved masses to the ruling class, the actual owners and officers of privately held, profitable corporations of whose asset base you are a very real part. Like Gordon B. Hinckley said, those who don't understand interest pay it. Those who do understand it collect it. This is also true of tithing and all government extortion practices. You will note that in exchange for the cooperation that the leaders offer to the government, they receive tax-exempt status, and donations are given tax credit benefits for those contributing to the organizations, as long as they support the agenda of those in power, which are not necessarily those who appear to be elected representatives of people in what appear to be democratic republics. When you learn that everything is actually commerce, including governments, whether city, county, state, or federal, or that employee retirement funds like CalPERS are actually multinational investment bankers masquerading as just what they appear to be for their employees, the whole landscape changes, the whole picture changes when you really understand that everything that you viewed, countries, cities, all these entities of governance, are actually companies. They're huge companies, and that you are actually part of the inventory in most cases. It really changes things, and we have to learn to reevaluate the world when we see how things are really being done, and we see the deception that's being worked upon the people and who it's been administered by. In other words, who is working to deceive us. It's really it kind of blows our whole our whole view of life. So we've seen a lot here, and people we've trusted in positions of leadership, we see cooperating with other people who we may not have trusted as much because it was more obvious that they were either derelict or evil. So we have to ask ourselves certain questions about why we believe what we believe, how we manage to believe what we believe, the processes that are utilized if we educate ourselves on the techniques of coercive persuasion. That's another term for the same thing. Is mind control. Now, when we hear the words mind control, that's a loaded phrase. We might affiliate that and associate it in our minds with something that we think is, like a zombie apocalypse or something. I mean, what we associate things with is a major portion of how our thoughts are controlled by those who understand the processes of doing this. And as we look, we'll see that people that we've trusted are actually trained at manipulating people's thoughts. There are techniques, neurolinguistic programming, hypnotic speech patterns, and there are people that know how to do this. People that may know how to do this. Whether they went to a Tony Robbins seminar or maybe they learned it, maybe Dieter learned it, in Switzerland at that great management school that he went to and other Illuminati leaders go to. You check and you see all these guys go to places that are rather elite for certain training. And at any rate, it's easier to wake up and see these processes being operated upon other people, like looking closely at the Jehovah's Witnesses or the people in Scientology or something of that sort. We can see, wow, look how they do that. And if you learn how to do it with them, you can see it on the media, and you see it in the media. Then all of a sudden you walk into primary and you hear, follow the prophet, follow the prophet, follow the prophet. He knows the way. When people are in a semi-hypnotic state singing a song, which is essentially like using a mantra, it induces brainwave states where people are more receptive to suggestion, especially on the subconscious level. We don't necessarily understand all these things. Not everybody does. But the people in leadership, many of them do, and have been trained for reasons. So we've covered a lot of things here. We've shown physical evidence of secret alliances. We've shown physical evidence that people are doing things that indicate they've got a certain alliance and that it's not a good one. And we've seen how corporations actually have governing power through corporate governance, through the power of the majority stock holdings that they have to basically direct the boards of directors. That's in all these companies. That's why you see AT&T commercials or Vodafone commercials or Chase Manhattan commercial, JP Morgan Chase, whatever, or Progressive Insurance, where they'll all start using certain politically correct themes in the commercials. And you say, why is it? How is it? Well, there's a coordinated effort from behind the scenes. That's why. And it all starts to fall into place when you realize how things are actually structured. Hope this video was helpful. Hope you still managed to have a good day. Hey, the art was pretty good, huh? The fellow who did the video that we used portions of recommends going to CAFR1.com, I think it was called, where they have some instructions on how they think that there can be some remedy to the corporate governance issue. And you can go there and see what they have to say, or go to his channel, which was World Tyranny, and you can see greater portions of that particular 3-hour video that was only on the corporations. For more details on a lot of other subjects with church history and church doctrine, where we documented things visually and so forth, primary source documents and good old scriptures, so forth, get into the channel here,
down at the bottom of the description, or the subscribe button, and we've got everything from, you know, translating the plates to polygamy to first vision and a lot more. I call it the Mormon Truth Video Library. On the Dodger game.